Hey, happy Tuesday. Glad you're with me for a moment. So, welcome to my little world. Come on in, enjoy a moment with me, and let's think together. And maybe sometimes we'll come up with something that makes a little bit of sense. I was thinking about some words in Matthew chapter 3. When it says of John the Baptist, now John himself, verse 4, John himself was clothed in camel's hair and a leather belt around his waist, and his food was locusts and wild honey. You may have heard that. You may have read it many times. I know I have. But today it's making me think about sometimes the oddest people make the biggest mark in the world. You ever notice that? Sometimes unintentionally. Sometimes maybe they're intending to, but quite often it's just the unique nature of the person brings out something very special, and maybe even brings out the best in people who look to them later. You know, Peter would say of Jesus, he went about doing good in Acts chapter 10. But you know, Jesus didn't come across as extremely odd, except that his teaching didn't jive with some of the religious people of the day. But John, he was different. He was different in the way he dressed and the way he presented himself, where he worked, the food he ate, the clothes he wore. He was a unique individual. Probably we have pictures of him in mind of how unique he was. But I want you to think about a person or two along the way that you've met that has made a difference in your life. And quite often you'll think it's somebody that's a little bit out of the ordinary. Maybe it's a teacher. Maybe it's a preacher even. Most of them are kind of odd. Maybe it's just a friend. And they're the ones we remember. Sometimes people fit into the mainstream and flow, and that's important. And yes, most of us just generally are a part of the ordinary flow and fit into the mainstream of life. But we need some of those unusual people. And I was thinking about one in particular. His name is John Chapman, or was. Born in 1774 in Massachusetts. John Chapman traveled a bit. As he grew old enough, he began to travel a bit in this brand new country. Born just prior to the Revolutionary War, growing up in an America that was forming itself, he traveled westward. Went across what is now West Virginia, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Indiana. And he had a unique way about him. He would go into towns and communities, and he would take what money he had and he might purchase a plot of land. And when he was there, he would do what you probably have heard, if the name rings a bell. He would plant. He would plant generally an apple orchard. Might leave it under somebody's care, might even sell some of it later, but he would plant orchards and he'd go to another place. He was a unique individual. He might see an animal in need, an old horse that was about to be put down. He might purchase that horse, and then he would go and buy a piece of property just for the horse to relax and enjoy. And maybe if the horse got a little stronger down the way, he'd sell the horse. He built up quite a bit of property along the way as he traveled over those various now states, areas of our country. And he would plant those seeds. I guess as a child I heard about Johnny Appleseed. Yeah, you knew. I heard about Johnny Appleseed and how he would travel planting apple trees across the country, and I was under the impression he just went from town to town and he would plant apple seeds in places so that the apple trees would grow everywhere. But actually he was a guy that was building up property. He lived about 70 years. Wandering about, wearing kind of unique clothing. Sometimes they pointed out he'd wear whatever he could find, and sometimes it was fairly limited. But he was an odd character. It's been noted, and legend has it, that he wore a tin hat or a tin pot on his head. That's what we heard about him as a kid, and maybe there's some truth to it. In fact, the Fort Wayne, Indiana baseball team took on the name, the Tin Caps, changing their name to follow after that. They even had, and maybe still do, I don't know, you'd have to check on that, still have the character with them that they named Johnny. Huh. Well, Johnny Appleseed, in his 70 years, planted a lot of apple trees, sold a lot of apple trees and property and so forth. But I think one of the interesting things that he did is he went from place to place, and people recognized him, saw him, knew him. He didn't get into politics much. He had an idea of religion. It was kind of a unique one that he followed after, but more than anything, and he would talk about a variety of subjects, but more than anything, he just was a little bit different. And his travels took him to see interesting people, interesting places. And as I said, occasionally buying property and planting an orchard there and letting it grow and it producing apples along the way, and ultimately, in Fort Wayne, Indiana, somewhere around the age of 70. There's a little bit, I say that because there's a little bit of question about exactly when he died, but I believe the Fort Wayne, Indiana paper had him listed at 1845. At about the age of 70, he passed away. You might think somebody like that come and go. Actually, much of his property got lost, and as he left it to a sister, I believe, and then much of his property is turned over. Today, you trying to find the property that belonged to him, it'd be a little bit of a challenge in some places. You might still find some and could go to his place, and there is even some question whether he's really buried in the grave he's in, but you know how those things go. But what I'm telling you is, here's a man that lived for 70 years, traveled about. He didn't reshape the world. But in the circle of events and the people he met, he had an influence. And while a lot of it is legend that is shared with our children today, Johnny Appleseed left an impact. He made a difference. And maybe children do simply learn the legend of the odd character that traveled about planting apple trees where he went, wearing his tin pot on his head. Odd enough. But think about it this way. We still hear about him. We still read about him. We still recognize the legend that was there. There's still people that want to know, want to go to his grave, want to see and recognize what he had done. That's why I said in the beginning, sometimes it's the most unique people. I think I used the word odd. Unique people that make the greatest impact and leave the greatest legacy behind. Not because they've changed the world, not because they've been conquering heroes, but simply because in the lives they meet, their unique nature, hopefully for the good, leaves with somebody, leaves with many, something to remember. John Chapman. Yeah. Maybe in a way he didn't do very much, but in his wandering 70 years of life, he left something that still impresses us, still touches us, and still reaches us today. I guess part of me is saying, it's okay to be a little bit odd. It's okay for people to think you're unique and different. Share your difference, share your ideas, share who you are. And while it may seem that you don't make a great impact roundabout, you never know. You just might be the one who makes the difference in the stories that are told when the years pass by. John Chapman, Johnny Appleseed as we think about him today, made a difference in lives. John the Baptist lived a short life, but here a couple of thousand years later, we still remember what he did. The clothes he wore, the things he ate, the way he lived, and the words he shared. Maybe there's some kind of connection. Think about it. So it's okay to be a little bit unique, odd, or different. Go ahead and be that way. Hey, I'm glad you're with me today. I hope it's an encouragement to you, and I hope we can share a lot of things down the way. Thanks for being with me. Thanks for coming into my little world for a moment, and we'll share some more things a little further down the road.